Ch.42, borrowing the Underpath, night crawl in Paradise Manor. Lian bent down slightly and greeted, "Hello there." Hearing the greeting, that eye squinted harder, turning itself into a full crescent shape, as if smiling. The large eye spun left and right, extremely lively, as if it wasn't just a pattern carved onto a scimitar hilt, but a real live eye, born of a human. Hua Cheng's lips lifted upwards. "Gege, it likes you." Lian raised his head. "Really?" Hua Cheng raised his brow. "Really? If it didn't, it'd be too lazy to even blink open. In fact, there are very few that Yiming actually likes." Hearing this, Lian felt at peace, and said warmly to Yiming, "Well, thank you." He then turned to Hua Cheng. "I rather like it too." At his words, that eye blinked madly, and the scimitar started shaking while still hung around Hua Cheng's waist. He reprimanded it. "No." "What, no?" Lian asked. "No," Hua Cheng reiterated. Yiming shook harder, looking desperate to be freed from the scabbard. Lian asked curiously, "Are you telling it no?" "Yeah," Hua Cheng explained in a serious tone. "It wants you to pet it, but I'm telling it no." Lian grinned. "Well, what's wrong with that?" He stretched out a hand. Yiming widened its eye, looking at him expectantly. Lian was going to pet the eyeball, but thought that would be poking the eye and hurting it, so he lowered his hand and stroked lightly along the curve of the hilt. The eye had squinted itself into a full crescent line, and quivered even harder as it was pleased and enjoying the touch. Lian thought it incredibly intriguing, the more he stroked the scimitar. Lian himself was the type animals liked when he'd pet those furry dogs and cats. They'd get comfortable and often throw themselves into his embrace. Who knew that he'd be petting a cold, silver scimitar, that legendary scimitar, no less. Like he would a puppy. How was it a bloody cursed blade of misfortune? Lian didn't believe it before, but after seeing with his own eyes, he threw away the awful hearsay into that not believable pile of trash. An evil, bloody ritual would not forge a spirit this clever and cute. The two spent a copious amount of time discussing and critiquing various swords and blades in detail, and Lian exited the armory in high spirits after grabbing hold of Hua Cheng's hands to return to Paradise Hall. That boy had also been brought in after being washed up and dressed in clean bandages. Although his face was still wholly covered, he looked new and refreshed. Looking at him anew, the boy was slender and delicate, and should have been a seedling with infinite possibilities, but alas, the him now was one with his shoulders slumped and waist bent, a shriveled form who couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Lian couldn't help but feel heartbroken for him. He pulled the boy to sit. "The last few words Xiao Ying said had the intent of asking me to take care of you, and I technically agreed to it. But nevertheless, I still have to ask for your opinion on it. Would you be interested in following me in cultivation from now on?" The boy watched him blankly, as if afraid to believe the words he was hearing, that someone was actually willing to take him in and cultivate. He looked hesitant and hopeful. Lian continued, "I can't say the conditions at my place are good, but I can still promise you won't need to hide any longer, and won't need to steal food or get beaten." When he spoke, Si Lian didn't notice that next to him, Hua Cheng's eyes were narrowed, watching the boy with a cold, judging look. Si Lian continued warmly, "If you can't remember your own name, then why don't we come up with a new one?" The boy thought about it and said, "Ying." Si Lian supposed that the name was to commemorate Xiao Ying, and nodded. "Good. That's a good name. You're of the kingdom of Yong'an, and Yong'an's national surname is Lang, so why don't you use that as your new name and call yourself Lang Ying?" The boy finally nodded. Si Lian took that as the boy's acceptance in following after him. The banquet began. It was a small feast Hua Cheng had prepared for Si Lian, but by its setup, it was of a size that could very well host over 10 people. Innumerous women had in their hands a jaded plate, and upon the plates were various kinds of delightful refreshments, delicate dishes, fresh fruits, and goodies. Their offerings were endless, and their steps were dainty and light as they walked along the sides of the main hall in a line, each presenting the jaded plate as they approached the black jaded divan. Lang Ying watched but didn't dare to reach out, and it wasn't until Si Lian pushed a few of the plates toward him before he slowly grabbed a few items to eat. Watching him, another scene flashed in Si Lian's mind. It was of another boy whose face was wrapped in bandages, dirty and unkempt, kneeling on the floor with a plate of offerings, his head bowed low as he stuffed his face in secret. Just then, a sashaying lady in purple silk approached, offering a carafe of wine. Hua Cheng reached out and poured Si Lian a glass. "Won't you have one?" Si Lian had a bunch of things on mind, and wasn't paying attention, so he carelessly accepted the glass and drank. It wasn't until the liquid entered his mouth that he realized it was wine, and moved his gaze back. But this turn made him see what was behind Hua Cheng's back. The lady who offered the wine winked at him. Si Lian spat on the spot. Pfffffftttt. Good thing he already swallowed that sip of wine, and nothing came splattering out of his mouth. He only choked, coughing non-stop. Lang Ying took fright and almost dropped the cake in his hand. Si Lian soothed as he coughed, "It's nothing. It's nothing." Hua Cheng gently patted his back. "What's wrong? Is the wine not to your liking?" Si Lian hurriedly explained himself, "Oh no. It's very good. I just suddenly remembered that my cultivation method forbids alcohol." "Oh," Hua Cheng said. "Then this is my fault for not being considerate, and making Gege break his vow." "It's not your fault," Si Lian said. "I'd just forgotten." Si Lian rubbed his forehead, turned around and stealthily glimpsed towards the center of the main hall. That lady who offered wine had her back to him as she sashayed away to the doors, her figure sensual and seductive. Hua Cheng was only minding his own business or was focused on Si Lian completely, and had no eye for those beautiful women, and therefore naturally did not care to see their faces. But the face Si Lian saw was clear and recognizable. That lady who offered wine was none other than the Wind Master Qingxuan. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. The Lord Wind Master had snuck into Paradise Manor disguised as a woman. That wink gave Si Lian Quite the shock, and he thought, you best give me more booze to swallow this down. Unaware, Hua Cheng said conversationally, I had always thought cultivation was simply for living a carefree, hedonistic life. If you must forbid this and that, then what's the point? What do you think? Si Lian steadied himself swiftly, and casually conversed back, that depends on the path you choose. Some sects don't mind earthly pleasures, but my chosen path of cultivation has always forbidden drinking and promiscuity. Alcohol can be overlooked once in a while, but abstinence from the latter is absolute. When he said the word abstinence, Hua Cheng cocked his right brow, and displayed an unreadable expression of either displeasure or annoyance. Si Lian continued, actually, it also forbids hatred. A gambling hall involves extreme joy and anguish, and can easily produce hatred, so it should be a place to be avoided. But if one is sure to maintain peace at heart, unmoved by wins and losses, then avoidance isn't technically necessary. Hearing this, Hua Cheng laughed out loud. So Gege was able to have the pleasure of entering the gambler's den. Going around in circles, Si Lian finally brought the subject of the conversation naturally to gambling, and said, speaking of which, San Lang, your gambling techniques are amazing to behold. Hua Cheng chuckled. It's just good luck, nothing else. Hearing this, Si Lian compared himself, and felt rather woeful. He cleared his throat softly. Well, look at me. He waved his hand and didn't finish. I'm really curious, is there really a technique to rolling dice? If there wasn't, then Hua Cheng couldn't just call the numbers as he wanted back at the gambler's den. And that waning moon officer couldn't have so easily tossed out 2 sixes. Hua Cheng smiled. Naturally, there is a secret technique, but it's not something that's learned in a day. Si Lian had expected that answer. He wasn't hopeful with that question anyway, and was trying to come up with other ideas when Hua Cheng continued. However, I can tell you of a faster way. I promise Gege would be able to succeed as he wills, and win every round. What way? Si Lian asked. Hua Cheng raised his right hand. It was the very same right hand with the red string tied on the third finger. The red string was tied into a small bow on the back of the hand, bright and vivid. He extended the hand and beckoned Si Lian. Give me your hand. Si Lian didn't know what it was for, but since Hua Cheng asked for his hand, he gave it to him. Hua Cheng squeezed his hand and held it for a bit, smiling before he turned his hand over and tossed 2 dice in his palm. Try it now. He chanted mentally for 6s, and rolled the dice. Rattling to a stop, the dice indeed revealed 2 red 6s. What trick is this? Si Lian asked curiously. No trick, Hua Cheng replied. I've only just lent you some luck. So luck is like spiritual power, and can be borrowed, Si Lian said in wonder. Hua Cheng laughed. Of course. Next time, if Gege is going to make bets with anyone, come see me. I'll lend you as much luck as you want. I promise your opponent will suffer a loss so great he won't be able to return in 100 years. The two played around for many rounds, and Si Lian confirmed for himself that it was indeed so, before he stopped to say he was tired. Hua Cheng got up immediately, had someone take Lang Ying to settle before personally escorting Si Lian to the guest chamber. Watching as his silhouette disappeared down the hall, Si Lian closed the door, sat by the table and used a hand to cover his forehead, supporting his lowered head. The more thoughtful Hua Cheng was, the more guilty Si Lian felt. There is really nothing to criticize about the way San Lang treats me. Hopefully this business has nothing to do with him, and once the truth comes out I'll explain everything and apologize, Si Lian thought. He had only sat for a moment when he heard someone calling him from outside the door with a small voice. Your Highness, Your Highness. Recognizing the voice, Si Lian immediately rose to open the door, and the person just outside leapt in. It was indeed Shi Qingxuan in her female form. She was still in the ghost lady get-up, a light silk dress, her waist wrapped tight and dainty. The moment she leapt in, she rolled onto the ground in a heap and transformed back to a man, hand on his chest. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. My God, I'm going to be choked to death by this thing. Si Lian closed the door behind him, and when he turned around, what he saw was a full-grown man in a wicked purple silk dress, lying on the ground madly ripping at his chest and waist bindings. Si Lian couldn't look and covered his eyes. Lord Windmaster, Lord Windmaster. Can you not just change back to your cultivation robes? Am I dumb? Shi Qingxuan replied. Walking around in the dark in a conspicuous white robe, I'd be a target. But, in your current get-up, on some level, you're more of a target. Si Lian thought. Si Lian crouched down next to him. Lord Windmaster, how did you sneak in? Didn't we agree to meet 3 days hence? Well, what was I to do? Shi Qingxuan replied. I asked around on the streets and they all said, Your Highness was sent to the Paradise Manor, and isn't Paradise Manor the Ghost King's lair? Even the name of the place sounded bad. I watched from afar and decided it was definitely an obscene and wanton place. So I was worried about you and snuck in using all of my power. What an unlucky journey this has been. Either I get dragged to facials by women and girls, or I had to swallow my honor to dress like this. I have never, ever, made sacrifices this huge. Aren't you rather enjoying yourself? Si Lian thought. Where's His Highness Tai Hua? If you left him waiting outside, what if he starts something? Shi Qingxuan finally ripped out all the bindings, took a deep breath, and sprawled to the ground like a puddle. Don't worry. I pulled rank and commanded him to not move a muscle, so there shouldn't be any issues. But seriously, Your Highness, you're so lucky. Ha! Si Lian gaped. Me? Lucky? Yeah. Shi Qingxuan exclaimed. Look how miserable Lang Qianchu and I are. We either get hung with the threat of having our pants pulled, or we wander the streets like stray dogs without a place to take us in. And here you are, eating well, sleeping well, and there's even a ghost king keeping you company. By that comparison, they were indeed rather miserable. Shi Qingxuan finally pulled himself up from the floor. So, Your Highness, do you still remember our objective for coming to the Ghost City? Si Lian returned to being serious and replied, Of course I remember. Back at the Paradise Hall, I was Preparing for our mission. Shi Qingxuan looked at him in confusion. Really? What exactly did you prepare at the Paradise Hall? I only remember you playing around with Crimson Rain sword flower rolling dice. You guys weren't even playing properly, you feeling up his hands and he was feeling up yours. What kind of new play was that? Si Lian explained himself. Lord Windmaster, please don't make it sound so questionable. We were only trying something out. I've found some clues here in the Paradise Manor and was investigating. 2. Keep going, I needed a little luck. Si Lian raised his right hand, fingers closed tight as if having grabbed hold of something, and knitted his brows. I've gotten it. The two silently snuck out the door, and after 2 incense time, they successfully found that small building once more. Si Lian approached the woman statue and took out the 2 dice given to him from before. He paused and took a deep breath before tossing the dice. The 2 little objects rattled before settling, and sure enough, there were 2 red 6s. Si Lian let out a breath of relief, but felt worse remembering that this luck was lent to him earlier at the Paradise Hall by Hua Cheng. Seeing his remorseful expression, Shi Qingxuan patted his shoulders. Since we've come this far, just let it go. If I were you, I would have declined this mission from Jun Wu. No matter how he begs, lest I be a poor friend. Si Lian shook his head. In the end, Shi Qingxuan could only say such words because he didn't know Jun Wu very well. This whole business was certainly awkward for Si Lian, and Jun Wu had known it. From his understanding of Jun Wu's character, under the circumstances he would never have mentioned this, and would have appointed another heavenly official to the mission. But even knowing this would be awkward for Si Lian, Jun Wu still requested for his assistance, which could only mean one thing: Jun Wu had no one else who was better suited to take on this mission, and only asked him out of necessity. If that was the case, Si Lian had no choice. Besides, the missing heavenly official set off the distress signal 7 days ago, and Hua Cheng also left 7 days ago. This was a coincidence he couldn't ignore. Si Lian sighed before taking back the dice and pushed the door. Behind the glamorous gates was no longer the small simple chamber he'd seen before, but a dark tunnel with a long stairway stretching into the abyss below, and a cold breeze blowing at him from the blackness. Si Lian traded looks with Shi Qingxuan and nodded. One behind the other, the 2 entered the tunnel and entered the darkness. Shi Qingxuan took the lead. He snapped his fingers and ignited a palm torch and lit up the steps under their feet. Si Lian closed the door gently and followed behind. As they descended, Si Lian inquired with Shi Qingxuan, Lord Windmaster, were there any heavenly officials banished from the heavenly court in recent years? I mean besides me. There were, Shi Qingxuan replied. Why do you ask? Because I saw on the wrist of that waning moon officer from the ghost city a cursed shackle. It could only come from the heavens. No. Shi Qingxuan was surprised. What cursed shackle? That Crimson Rain sword flower is using a former heavenly official as his subordinate. What arrogance! It can't be arrogance. Si Lian responded. If one no longer belongs to the heavens, then wherever one goes would be their choice. Originally there really was no need to question his motives, but that officer's been acting suspiciously. It's worrisome, so I wanted to see what Lord Windmaster's thoughts are on his identity. Qi Qingxuan gave it some thought and said, there was indeed a martial god of the West who was banished a few years back, and it caused quite the stir at the time. Martial god of the West. Wasn't that Quan Yizhen? Qi Qingxuan continued, but I don't think that Highness would descend to the ghost realm to be a ghost officer. He came from an established, traditional background and his character wasn't frivolous. If that was the case, then why was he banished? Si Lian was about to continue his inquiry when the two came to flat ground after 60 or so stone steps. Before them was a road about 5 to 6 people wide, going in only one direction that was shrouded in darkness, the staircase right behind. On either side were thick, solid walls, so there wasn't any need to debate where to go, just go forward. Only, after walking along the path for over 200 steps, a cold stone wall appeared before the two, blocking their path. Next chapter. Ch.43, Borrowing the Underpath, Night Crawl in Paradise Manor 2. Qi Qingxuan frowned. The road's cut off. No way. He held the palm torch in one hand, and used the other to feel around the stone wall, looking for any signs of mechanics. He then cast a few spells for clearing illusions to no avail. The wall remained immovable. There wasn't more he could do. Maybe he'll just punch a hole through it. That would cause way too much commotion, Si Lian said. The entire Paradise Manor would be alerted. Qi Qingxuan placed his hand flat on the stone wall and blasted a short burst of spiritual energy, but dropped his hand after a moment. Even if I punch it, it'd be useless. This wall is probably over 10 feet thick. Si Lian saw with his own eyes that the masked youth had entered here. It'd be silly to think he'd sneak around just to meditate and reflect in a dead-end tunnel. There must be some sort of mechanism involved. So the two continued to examine their surroundings in greater detail. Soon, Si Lian pointed. Lord Windmaster, take a look at the ground, there seems to be something. Qi Qingxuan dropped his palm immediately, and the two squatted around where Si Lian had pointed. The ground of this tunnel was paved with numerous square bricks, and each brick was about the size of a small door. The brick that they were standing on, right in front of the stone wall, had a drawing upon it. It wasn't a large picture, but it was of a little person throwing dice. Qi Qingxuan raised his head. So does this mean it's the same method as before, that we'd have to toss the right number to open this stone wall? Si Lian nodded slightly. That looks to be the case, but I didn't come in here with that masked youth, so I don't know what the right number is. We've come this far, Qi Qingxuan said. It's not realistic to turn back just to find that out. Let's just throw a random number and see. Si Lian agreed. Lord Windmaster, why don't you give it a go? I don't know how long my borrowed luck would last. Qi Qingxuan didn't decline. He picked up the dice and tossed them to the floor. How about that? He rolled a 2 and a 5. The two waited in silence, but the stone wall didn't move. Si Lian picked Up the dice. I guess that didn't work. Shi Qingxuan suddenly cried, Your Highness, look under our feet. The pictures changed. Hearing this, Si Lian immediately looked down. Sure enough, the image on the square brick beneath their feet had been a little person throwing dice, but as they watched, the colors slowly faded and filled in once more, transforming into a different scene, looking like a long, fat, and thick, black creepy crawler. What in the world is this? Shi Qingxuan wondered. An earthworm. A leech. Si Lian guessed. That's what it looks like. There's plenty in the paddy fields. Sir, I've seen a lot. Shi Qingxuan wondered some more. What kind of life did you lead to see a lot of this stuff? Before his words were finished, his entire person disappeared. It wasn't just him, Si Lian himself disappeared too. Turns out, just as the words, what in the world were uttered, they both felt hollow beneath their feet at the same time, and the next moment they started free falling into another tunnel. Turns out, that stone wall wasn't a door after all, and was in all seriousness, a wall. The square brick beneath their feet was the real door. After tossing the dice, the doors opened suddenly and closed instantly. Si Lian and Shi Qingxuan free fell for only a moment before landing heavily onto the ground. It was a good thing that the ground was soft, otherwise the two would have cratered in deep. They didn't think the fall was painful and were just pulling themselves up when their heads knocked into each other. They aired and fell back to the ground. Si Lian, with one hand covering his forehead, was feeling about his surroundings with his other hand, but only made contact with the soft, wet, muddy ground. There were no stone tiles. That stone wall was long gone. When they fell earlier, the palm torch Shi Qingxuan ignited had been extinguished. Now that he had lit it up once more and brightened their surroundings, the two discovered that they were in a mud tunnel. The tunnel was round in shape with muddy walls, and didn't appear to be man-made. Shi Qingxuan rubbed his forehead. What is this place? Did we get thrown here because we tossed the wrong number? Si Lian hummed and said, It's very possible. That stone door is gone, meaning we have no chance of turning back. Let's think of a way to escape first. The two talked it over and decided to keep following the tunnel path. The tunnel had innumerous twists and turns, and if a full-grown adult wanted to stand up straight in it, they'd have a hard time. They could only bend at the waist to walk, or crawl, moving both slowly and tiresomely. The air in this tunnel was also warm and moist, the mud clingy and annoying, each of their steps sinking and dragging, watery and gross. Sometimes, they would even step into the rotten remains of plants or animals. Si Lian's face never changed, but Shi Qingxuan had goosebumps pop up all over. But the more they traversed, the more Si Lian felt something was off. Lord Windmaster, we better move faster, otherwise. Just then, a loud, bizarre roaring sound came echoing. The noise crashed in, the entire tunnel shook, and small blots of mud pitter-pattered down from the quaking. The two looked at each other, and without a word, they sped off in the opposite direction of the noise. Yet that loud sound and the huge quaking shook the tunnel violently, and its speed was much faster than theirs, cutting in closer by the second. The two of them moved with much difficulty, one step shallow and one step deep, crawling through the twisting tunnel without end in sight, not even a ray of light. And not just that, but the direction they were running towards also reverberated the same huge noise and quaking. Both front and back were blocked, the two had to stop. Along with the crashing noises, the sound of a heavy and gigantic body pushing through the mud whammed past, and two humongous earthworms wiggled in, appearing before Si Lian and Shi Qingxuan. The two worms were swollen and large, their bodies a bruising purple, the skin lightly translucent. The body of the insects was segmented, no head, no tail, the fronts were only a meat stump. If those weren't worms, then what were they? The stone door opened and threw them into such a monster's nest. Si Lian raised an arm to guard before himself, Ruoye at the ready. Shi Qingxuan untucked his wind master fan from who knows where. Unfortunately, in this narrow tunnel it was impossible to start any gusts, and any blows would only recoil, making it hard to make use of that spiritual device. Just then, Si Lian recalled that worms were afraid of light and heat, and he shouted, "Lord Wind Master, please let me have some power, and intensify the palm torch." Shi Qingxuan followed his direction, and tapped Si Lian with his left hand while the flames in his right palm burst a few feet higher. Sure enough, the two giant worms felt the heat and shrunk back, pulling away a few feet in distance. The two, using the flames, continued on their path slowly, forcing the giant earthworms to keep a distance, and prayed for an exit. However, the tunnel was narrow, and soon enough, it wasn't only the worms feeling the heat from the flames, Si Lian and Shi Qingxuan themselves were sweating profusely, as if they were baking in an oven, miserable and wretched. And the more horrifying thing was, Shi Qingxuan couldn't keep up burning his powers to keep the flames alive, and the fire grew smaller and smaller. They also noticed that although the giant earthworms were evading him, they weren't as jittery. After a few more steps, Si Lian felt his breathing grow difficult and said, "Lord Wind Master, the palm torch won't last. The mud here may be moist and loose, but we're still deep underground. Soon the air will no longer pass, the fire will die, and we're going to faint." Shi Qingxuan gritted his teeth. "Then we can only use the distance-shortening array." Although neither of the two had a free hand to draw an array and the current environment wasn't exactly ideal, there was no other way. "Let me find somewhere flat," Si Lian said. Just then, he felt beneath his step a small plate that didn't seem to be moist and spongy, but more so like a stone tile. Si Lian's mind moved and he immediately crouched down to check. Just as he suspected, it was another stone door. There was also another drawing of a little person tossing dice on this door. Shi Qingxuan also stepped onto the tile and was overjoyed. "Quick, quick, quick! Throw the dice and open it." Si Lian was just about to toss out the dice but suddenly thought, "But what if I roll out worse outcomes? And open a more horrifying place?" Si Lian passed the dice to Shi Qingxuan. "Here, you do it." Without a word, Shi Qingxuan grabbed the dice and tossed. Rattle, rattle. This time it was a 3 and a 4. Si Lian picked up the dice readily, and the two stood together over the tile. The palm torch on Shi Qingxuan's hand became smaller by another inch. The two giant worms were squirming and twisting, struggling to approach. Si Lian watched the drawing on the tile closely as it slowly dissolved into another picture. It was of a forest, and a number of weirdly dressed little people were dancing in circles around another. Just then, one of the worms wouldn't hold back anymore, and rushed toward them with a small mouth on the head opening, dragging its heavy body. Thankfully, just as the worms were only mere feet away from them, the stone door opened. This time, the two fell into another narrow hole, but the ground was hard, cramped, and dry. The fall was painful and the two tumbled and knocked into each other. Si Lian was used to pain, so he didn't make a sound, but Shi Qingxuan yelled in pain. Si Lian's ears were hurt by the loud screaming. Worried something might have happened, he called out, "Lord Wind Master, are you okay?" Shi Qingxuan's head was at the bottom and his legs up. "I don't know if I'm okay. I've never fallen like this before. Your Highness, there's way too much frill working with you." Hearing this, Si Lian couldn't help but let out a small laugh, and realized the two of them fell into a hole in a tree. He crawled out of the hole with great difficulty and extended a helping hand to Shi Qingxuan. "Thanks for all your hard work." "You're welcome," Shi Qingxuan replied. He pulled on Si Lian's hand and climbed out of the hole, muddy and disheveled, his silk dress robe ripped and rumpled. When he got out, he put a hand over his brows to block out the sharp brightness of the sun. "Where's this?" "As you see, a forest in the deep mountains," Si Lian replied. He looked around him and said, "I think these stone doors are a spiritual device that have the same function as the distance-shortening array. Different numbers tossed will take us to different places. I wonder if we tossed any right numbers." Shi Qingxuan crossed his two now bare arms and pondered seriously. Using the distance-shortening array just once requires an immense amount of spiritual power to create these stone doors to prevent others from snooping around. That crimson rain-sought flower is indeed powerful and no stranger to mind games. Although his expression was solemn, with bare arms and such an unkempt disposition, he didn't look serious at all, rather hilarious. Si Lian held back his laugh with great difficulty. He thought about the way Hua Cheng would lift his lips and shook his head. Rather than mind games, it's more that he's mischievous, Si Lian thought. The two only just gotten out of the hole in the tree, and not even a few steps after a number of red-skinned naked people suddenly poured out from the nearby bushes and surrounded them. They started jumping, howling as they did so. "Oh-oh-h-h-h-u-h-hoosh!" Exclamation mark. The two were shocked, and Shi Qingxuan cried, "What is this now?" Exclamation mark. Si Lian raised his hand. Don't panic, don't panic. Let's take a look first." He steadied himself to look at those savages. They weren't truly naked, but were wearing animal skins and leaves, looking like they were ready to drink blood. They had long branch spears and sharp stone axes in hand, and when they smiled at the two, their teeth were jaggedly sharp like saws. The two ran without saying a word. Shi Qingxuan shouted as he ran, "My brother used to always tell me that deep in the southern mountains are many savage cannibals that live off of human flesh. He told me not to ever come to such a place on my own. Is that what those are? Exclamation mark. Si Lian was practiced in the art of escape, so his entire demeanor and manner were much more serene than Shi Qingxuan. He replied calmly, That's very possible. Either way, let's find the door first. Let's see if there are any more stone doors nearby. Those savages ran after them, screaming and howling tirelessly. Originally, Si Lian and Shi Qingxuan could only escape and not fight back because there were heavenly laws that dictated that should gods ever descend to the mortal realm, they shall not use their powers to oppress. This law was to prevent heavenly officials from bullying mortals and creating disasters born of power abuse. But the cannibals unceasingly threw sharp rocks and branches at him, and one such branch scraped Shi Qingxuan's cheek. This was absolutely unacceptable. Shi Qingxuan felt his face, and there was the lightest of a bloody scratch, and saw red. He roared and came to a sudden stop. Turning around, he shouted, "You ignorant hillbilly! Savages! Not only did you not cower in fear before me, the Lord Wind Master, you dare ruin my face!" Exclamation mark. Unbelievable! Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. After his cries, he pulled out his Wind Master fan, flashing it open with a powerful whoosh, and swung with force. The savages were blown off the ground and smashed into nearby trees, howling as they hung off the branches. The two could finally stop running, and took in deep breaths, trying to calm their heartbeat. That thought came to Si Lian again. It's hard being a god. In the three realms, no one had it easier. Shi Qingxuan huffed and turned to Si Lian. "Your Highness, you saw it, right? They were asking for it. I wasn't using my powers to oppress. I saw." "Yes," Si Lian said. Shi Qingxuan felt his face again and mumbled under his breath, "Even my brother wouldn't dare." He turned around again. "Let's go find that stone door." Si Lian nodded silently and watched Shi Qingxuan fix his clothes and hair, looking carefree once more. Unfortunately, he was dressed in a bedraggled purple silk dress, so his carefree air had a queer, peculiar flavor. It was an unforgettable sight. Si Lian couldn't help but lament, thinking back on when they first met at the Banyu Pass. The Lord Wind Master was such a scintillating figure, so much so that Si Lian had thought him a powerful being with immeasurable depth, if not of a supreme demonic cultivator, then a supreme saint. Now that they were close, he understood everything was but an illusion. The two walked around in circles in the forest and finally found a set of stone doors next to a different tree hole. This time, Shi Qingxuan refused to toss the dice and shook his head. "I don't know what's going on, but even though my luck isn't the best every time, it's also not the worst every time. Lady Fortune doesn't seem to be with me today. Twice I tossed, and the first time was that earthworm tunnel, the second time a cannibal playground. Who knows what's next?" Si Lian cleared his throat softly and guiltily replied, "Maybe it's because I'm with you, so I brought your luck down with me." "What are you saying?" Shi Qingxuan exclaimed. "It's impossible for anyone to bring down my luck. The Lord Windmaster. But why don't you give it a go? Maybe there's still some of the lac you borrowed from your San Lang left. Si Lian didn't know why, but he felt a little embarrassed when he heard your San Lang. He wanted to explain, but at the same time, what's there to explain? If he must explain, then it'd be a little weird, so in the end, he didn't say anything. He felt the dice in his hands and tossed them out lightly. 2 6s. Si Lian held his breath as he watched the drawings on the stone door transform, and mentally prepared himself to face whatever came next. But this time, the picture didn't change, and the stone door creaked open. Behind the door was another long stairway that descended into darkness, blowing cold air. The two looked at each other, both thinking, did we circle back to the beginning after going through all that? Even if it was back at the beginning, it was still better than bizarre dangers, they'd had enough. Thus, the two decided to descend. The moment they entered through, the door closed behind them, and when they reached out to push, the door had become a stone wall. Looks like our only way is down, Si Lian said. Ugh, all right, Shi Qingxuan sighed. Let me take a breather and we'll continue to play that hateful Crimson Rain Sword Flowers game. The two once again descended down the long and rectangular stony path. After 200 steps or so, Si Lian realized something. Good news, Lord Windmaster. This isn't the same path we took the first time, even though they're similar. Shi Qingxuan noticed it too. You're right. The first time we reached the stone wall after 200 some steps, but not this time. Si Lian said softly, looks like this time we're on the right path. Just as he finished his words, the two came to a stop. Not far before them in the darkness wafted the stench of blood. Accompanying the smell was the heavy breathing of a man. The two didn't move a muscle, and said no words. No light, no flames, yet the other party had already sensed their presence, because right after they stopped, a cold voice rang out. I have nothing to say, the deep voice of a man said. Hearing that voice, Shi Qingxuan immediately ignited a palm torch.